Tavis Smiley is a controversial TV talk show host who was recently suspended from his show on PBS over allegations of sexual misconduct at work.
And now he's going on a nationwide tour to discuss the topic of men and women in the workplace.
Tavis is here now to share his story. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Good to be on the Jam. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So our big question, it's the elephant in the room.
Sure.
Given everything that's happened with the allegations surrounding you, why do you feel like you're the right person to lead a conversation like this?
First of all, I've never led a conversation. I'm a lover of people, certainly black people. I'm not a leader of anybody. I love people. When you love people, you try to give them information that can help them re-examine their own assumptions, expand their inventory of ideas, see the world through a different prism. That's our role, to try to give people information that can empower their lives. And so I'm not doing anything different now than I've always done, trying to convene democratic spaces where people can come out in the public, free and open to the public, to have a conversation about these issues. Now, the fact that I've been pulled into this in a personal way makes me feel this much more acutely. And you can rest assured, I got a whole lot of questions because in my own situation, all I have is questions. I don't have any answers. And so this conversation, this town hall tour is about allowing Chicagoans to come out tonight and to have an open, transparent conversation about where the lines are. The bottom line is very quickly that men and women see this issue very differently about how we engage in the workplace. What is appropriate office protocol? What is appropriate date protocol? There's a generational divide on these issues. And so we got to come together and have a conversation to figure out what we do and where this conversation is headed.
So I love the idea of open conversation.
Yeah.
I love the idea of men being a part of that conversation. Here's the issue I see. You've admitted to consensual sexual relationships with colleagues. How are you going to be a part of that conversation if you haven't had any sort of rehabilitation? Because I'm not sure that I trust that prism that you're talking about.
I'm not sure that rehabilitation is the right word. Let me just back up for a second. I'm a little older than you, so I've been doing this for 30 years in this business. I'm single, I don't have any kids, I'm not married.
Right.
Over 30 years, I was asked, have you ever had a relationship with a colleague over 30 years? The answer was yes. Why does that require rehabilitation? Barack and Michelle.
Multiple colleagues. That's why people are
over
worried.
30 years. If I've had a few relationships with people I work with over 30, I know that's hard for you to imagine at your age, but over 30 years,
No,
I've had
it's not. I understand.
Okay, but my point is, I'm not saying you don't understand. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just saying over a 30-year period. Multiple could be 2, multiple could be 3. I don't know what we're talking about because I've said repeatedly, PBS never told me who the accusers were. I don't know what the allegations are. I don't know anything.
Right.
This happened 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks later, I still sit here today and I don't know anything. So today it's me, but tomorrow it's your husband or your brother or your son or your nephew. Nobody wants their past to come back to haunt them and to lead to their termination, to public shaming, especially when you don't know what we're talking about. This country is built on the bedrock principles of presumption of innocence and due process. So it's not about rehabilitation. Barack Obama and Michelle Obama met in Chicago at a law office in the workspace. Bill met Melinda Gates at Microsoft in the workplace. Jeff Bezos at Amazon met his wife in the workplace. My point is that these things do happen.
You can meet people in the workplace, but if you're talking about multiple allegations, some would consider that to just be poor judgment.
Yeah, even if it is poor judgment, over a 30-year period, I hear your point, I want to be respectful of that. But over a 30-year period, if you've dated a few people you've worked with over 30 years, even if that's misjudgment, let me ask you a question. Even if it's misjudgment, does it lead to termination when it comes back years later? Should you be fired for that? Should you be trolled for that? Should you be publicly shamed for that? That's the question. Even if it's misjudgment, let's just take your analysis. Even if it's misjudgment, does it lead to public shaming and trolling? And that's the issue here.
So Tavis, let me ask you this. Is there perspective you've gained from this fallout or anything that you've learned that you'd say, hey, if I could go back, I would do this differently?
So for those who follow my work, I've written not 1, not 2, but 3 books. I've written 22 books in my career, but 3 of those books specifically were about mistakes I've learned, lessons I've learned along the way. One of those books is called Fail Up. A book with 20 stories in it that I learned from the worst mistakes, the worst failings I've ever had in my life.
Specifically to what's going on now.
So my point is that everything you go through is a lesson and there's a blessing. You learn from it all the time. So I don't know what all the lessons are. I'm learning those lessons as I go through them. Somewhere down the road, maybe there'll be a book about what I learned from this process. But I'm just trying to get through it every day. But I really can't really impress upon you what it feels like to be in a situation like this. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, where you are publicly shamed, you're being trolled for something that you don't know what it is. And this is what PBS has said. This is what these investigators have said. But PBS made its decision to pull the plug on my show without having even talked to me. So I don't know anything. That's the real problem here. You can't defend yourself if you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you're saying that you don't know, like, specifically what they're talking about, that you would want more details. Have you, of course you've asked, I'm sure.
Sure.
But are there any legal proceedings, or is there a way,
So the first thing I did was to respond to this and say that these allegations are false. I've never harassed anybody. I've never assaulted anybody. I've never forced anybody, coerced anybody, groped anybody. I mean, to your question, when you get accused of something like this, you spend all your days trying to figure out where could this be coming from. I know they've talked to former employees, some of whom were fired. They never interviewed anybody on my current staff. They didn't interview the head. They didn't interview the head of my HR department.
But don't you think if employees were fired, then it almost looks worse because were they fired because they had relationships?
What I'm saying
with
is that people who were let go by my company over 30 years were interviewed. Not even just women, men as well.
Okay.
So I say I don't know if we're talking about how many men or women they've interviewed. I repeat myself. I don't know anything. That's the problem with this.
But you do know how many people you had relationships with.
Absolutely, and I'm very comfortable with those relationships. Here's the bottom line, and you certainly know this in the age that we live today. Anybody you've had a consensual relationship with, that's all I've ever had, is consensual relationships in my entire life. Anybody you've had a relationship with, you can prove that it was consensual pretty easily. You got letters, you got text messages, you got photographs, you got gifts, you've got cards, you've traveled the world together. Any relationship I've ever had, I can prove it very simply, it was consensual. So again, when all you've ever had is consensual relationships, and you can prove that, but you don't get asked about those relationships, nobody's asking you for evidence to prove that it was consensual, you don't know what you're talking about, that's the problem. And that's not the way we want this country to go. It's not good for your generation, because again, you're sitting here today because you're young and cute and handsome, and your careers are just getting started. You don't want to look up,
and journalists.
of course, absolutely. You don't want to look up 30. That's my point, though. That's the point I'm making. You don't want to look up 30
you call
years.
Me cute.
No, I'm saying I'm not trying to insult you. What I'm saying is that you're in the start of your career. What I'm suggesting is when you get to be old like me, you don't want to look back 30 years later and have something that you did 30 years ago come back to haunt you when you don't even know what they're talking about. So I didn't mean to insult you. I'm not trying to insult you.
You're not. I do think that PBS should tell you what the allegations are.
And that's all we're saying. Yeah.
Tavis, let me ask you this. There's another colleague of yours, Charlie Rose, who's dealing with this, and you would probably say in a different realm is he's being accused of. Have you specifically talked to him, or have other colleagues, have you been able to communicate with them and express your vantage point and say, hey, don't perceive me as this. This is what it is. Is there people in particular in this business?
I don't want to reveal relationships I've had, conversations that I've had with personal friends of mine. Charlie and I are personal friends. I would never reveal those conversations. What I can say is one of the other dangers of this process is that we end up conflating things. If you had a consensual relationship, even if it was the worst mistake you ever made, if you had a consensual relationship, that can't be conflated between two adults. That can't be conflated with sexual assault, with sexual misconduct, with rape. You can't conflate those things, and that's the problem as well. So the president of PBS, Paula Kerger, had an interview a few weeks ago, and she even made it clear that Charlie's case and my case are very different. So I don't like the idea of being conflated with Harvey Weinstein. I don't really know Harvey Weinstein, but when you get thrown in that bag, that's not a comfortable spot to be in.
Well, we got to hold it right where it stands right there. Tavis Smiley will be joining us for the next segment, so you don't want to go anywhere. A lot more to discuss. We thank Tavis for being here.
My pleasure.
Stick around, everybody.